Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Capital Conversations. I am your guest host, Ryan Potts, and with me today is Cherry, one of our new advisors. Cherry, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Excited.
Absolutely. I'm glad that we could have you on. For all of you that watched the last episode, Colin is actually back in town, but it is a new day. I'm wearing the same shirt, and the world is beautiful. Today we get to talk about kind of a fun topic. It's going to be around financial red flags. And really just what Cherry, me, and the other advisors at the firm have noticed when we talk to new oncoming prospects and also clients that we have that maybe work with multiple advisors. So how does that sound?
Sounds good.
Awesome. I think we'll start, just based on some of the things we've talked about already, with financial planning red flags, and then we'll move on to more maybe professional red flags.
Sure.
What we mean by financial red flags, I think first and foremost, we always want to start with just a disorganized client. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about what a disorganized client or prospect looks like when they come into the firm?
Yeah, it is really not uncommon that people come to us like have disorganized, don't know where everything is, and which can cause issue because data is not organized and we don't know what are the big picture of where assets are, and people usually do not have a budget. And even if sometimes people have a budget, they not have time to track their budget, track their spending. So it's easily to have living beyond means, and which would cause credit card snowballing, and things can easily get out of control. The thing is that the more disorganized, the more you just feel like don't know where to start.
Right.
The more you don't know where to start, the more tend to procrastinating. And the thing is that the more people put up doing things, the worse their situation could be. So it really can be a vicious cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's a huge deal because when we're talking about financial planning specifically, obviously we're talking about taking someone from point A to point B and giving them the roadmap or the guardrails to get them to point B. But if they come in the door and they don't even know where they are at today, or we don't even know where point A is, how are we supposed to look forward and kind of move towards point B without a stable structure? So I think that's always good. And you used a good example as budgeting being one of those things, like some people we talk to don't have their budget in wraps. Obviously, in a financial plan, it's important with cash flows to know how much money's coming in versus what's going out. And if we're talking about retirees, it's really important because we're trying to figure out how much of the portfolio are we going to be sending to you on a monthly or annually basis, and is it a sustainable rate? The other thing about disorganization I know we've talked about before too, and outside of the budget, is just really disorganization in the sense of just their entire portfolio. And maybe what's going on from the sense of like what accounts do you have and where are you putting dollars, either from a savings perspective or with your employer. Do you have any good examples, or maybe can you think of something that would be a red flag from the sense of just the portfolio being out of sorts, or maybe it's not being aligned with the financial plan from the get-go?
Yeah, so the things I've seen, sometimes their assets are not in the right location. For example, in the Roth IRA, you end up having muni bonds in there. That's not appropriate. Or for a taxable account, you have mutual funds which have distributions, and then we have the capital gains. So it's not tax efficient. Sometimes you can see that the client's portfolio allocation are not really in line with their time horizon, the time to retirement or to achieve their goals. So there is a disconnect as well. And other times you see that just overall the portfolio strategy is not optimized based on the asset allocation or asset location. That's what
I think that it's a great example with the muni bonds and the Roth account, or just having assets dislocated, as we like to call it. Yeah. I know we've talked about in the past, everyone, the bucket approach, the short-term, mid-term, long-term, or cash income growth. different strokes for different folks, right? But what I'm getting at is when you are looking at a portfolio for a client and you're talking about financial planning, it's always important to have your assets allocated either to a time horizon because you have short-term, long-term, mid-term goals, or your risk tolerances. If you're a younger individual, you need to have money set aside that's going to be invested for 10, 20, 30 years to reach your long-term goals. And sometimes we see people that come in and, they might have a goal to buy a house in the future in the next 5 years, but all their money's invested to go towards this house where we need to be having a conversation about, well, some of the money can go towards this house, but the rest of it really should be talking about these long-term goals. Not having the allocation in an appropriate manner, I think that's a good one. I think in that order too, though, just to kind of go back to the disorganization, it's important that we start with organizing the client's scenario or the snapshot of where they're at today, because that's really how we should be striving to find portfolio recommendations. A lot of times, I know a red flag from my perspective as a portfolio manager, we'll see an account or an investment lineup and then go back and do a financial plan and realize that however this investment was put together, it did not start with the financial plan. It probably started with investments first and then moved to a financial plan. So that's always a good one. I think the biggest thing that we see that's the most challenging for people to understand is obviously not just investing, but financial planning. There's time constraints. And a lot of what we're doing requires us to have as much time as possible to kind of plan for things ahead and also plan for things that we don't see on the horizon. So maybe what would be a good example of a red flag of maybe someone starting too late, so i.e. someone coming in after retirement, or maybe after an inheritance is met? Like, what are some good examples, or why would that be a red flag for a client?
A lot of times, people do not know the true value of working with a financial advisor until they actually work with one. For example, recently I had a client came to us that they had an inheritance of inherited IRA from their relatives, and then they wanted to know how to spend the money in the most optimal ways. So I run our planning portal, Red Capital, and then give them several different scenarios and laid it out and basically tell them pros and cons of each scenarios and some of the watch out and some of the tax implications. And they really liked, because without the planning, for example, they were just thinking they're going to withdraw all the money from the inherited IRA and pay down all the student loans at once.
Right.
But when we run into the scenario model, we find out, well, that may not be, because what happened, you're going to have a huge tax bill to pay all at once.
Right.
So that may not be ideal, optimal. And at other times, a client came to us, I've also seen situation where the husband or wife, they work with different financial advisor, end up with having too many advisors and have assets in multiple locations. And so these multiple advisors, sometimes they are work on a silo, not talking to each other. So they end up with not making recommendation truly from the holistic planning perspective. So it's really not at the overall arching provide and most sound plan for.
And I think the first example about the client who inherited some wealth from the family, had they not worked with us to figure out the most optimal spending strategy for those new inherited dollars, they could have made a decision to go out and just pull everything out of this account, pay off their student loans or whatever the case may have been, and not known that they would have just got hit with a huge tax liability. And obviously, once you do it, it's really hard to go back. Most times you can't just go back and go back, kind of run the clock backwards and not do it. So it's important that people are working with advisors to make really just educated decisions, but also trying to figure out what's the most optimal strategy for their scenario. And a lot of people rely on we're going to do it ourselves, but then after they do it, they might realize we maybe didn't make the right decision, go back and talk to an advisor. Well, unfortunately, it's too late then. You've already made the decision. So it's always important to rope in a financial advisor when you're having those conversations. I think you were bringing up another great point, talking about clients of ours, but also just people that we talk to every day who say that they're comfortable working with multiple advisors, and they would rather not have only one or two, but maybe they're looking at 3, 4, 5, 6 advisors, or even more than that potentially. I think That's a red flag, as you were alluding to, because now you've lost the holistic approach of maybe one advisor that they're willing to offer you because they're working in a silo or they don't have the ability to see the rest of your accounts or your situation. I think there's some other things that we could talk about too around the conversation, multiple advisors, but also just some people not working with the right professional just in general. And I think some of the things that we talk about obviously all the time are people who work with non-fiduciaries. Are you comfortable kind of maybe laying out why it would be a red flag not working with a fiduciary, and why maybe working with someone like us who is a fiduciary is in your best interest?
Right. Do you want to make sure to ask the right question to the advisors? How are they paid? If they their fees are just all from the client, then advisor truly work for the client. Client is the boss, and we serve for the best interest of our client's need. If other times, if their compensation are from commissions, for example, then they would be conflict interest where they are thinking about selling the product more than what's best for the client, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think going up or alluding to that as well, sometimes advisors might give recommendations that they're not implementing, within their own personal wealth. And obviously everyone's situations are different, so you don't want someone just handing out cookie cutter advice to you.
Right.
But I would always argue that an advisor who is eating their own cooking or following their own recommendations is moving in the right direction.
Sure.
If someone is pushing a product or is making a commission on a transaction, I think it's always prudent. Are you doing this yourself? Is this something that you've implemented within your own wealth? A lot of times what we're doing for our clients here, a lot of our advisors are implementing within their own personal wealth as well. So that's always a strong one. I know this one touches home for you, just because I know you deal a lot with these types of clients. It's a really great niche. But talk to me a little bit about the red flags of advisors not being willing to work with both spouses in a relationship, or not being adamant about working with both spouses in a relationship.
So the red flag for that is that one spouse can be, usually the husband, be really financially knowledgeable, but the wife being left out. The downside of that, if anything, God forbid, anything were to happen to the husband and then left, and the widow would be left with a bunch of assets and not knowing what to do. At that point, really needed more so than not needed advisor to help them to consolidate everything in one place and provide a holistic view, and also even to educate our client how to invest, especially for clients who do not have such a background.
Right.
So
I think good examples of that are always, we see it all the time, but maybe not a client of ours, but someone we end up working with. They had multiple advisors in the past, and they also didn't have the spouse involved in the conversation. So, upon the passing of whoever was the decision maker, spouse is left now dealing with multiple professionals, a scattered portfolio, and not a financial plan that is encompassing of all of these things. Right. And they're usually the ones with the most questions because they weren't involved with the decision making for a while. They don't really understand the strategy that's been implemented, and they come to us looking for clarity and advice, and really just having someone be an advocate for them to help make things make sense. So I think those are all really good things. In summary today, we've talked a little bit about being disorganized from a financial planning perspective. We've talked about how disorganization can lead to, we call them investment blind spots, or making errors in your portfolio. We've talked about the importance of starting early. And obviously it's never too late to start, but the earlier you can, the better off typically you are. We've talked about working with multiple professionals. Not always a bad thing, but it could be in some points. We've also talked about making sure the professional that you are working with is working in your best interest and has the client's interest before theirs, and how important that could be. And then ultimately just making sure that both of the parties involved, the spouses, are involved with as much of the decision making and strategy as possible, so they're not left in the dark, unfortunately, when stuff happens. Right. So with that being said, is there anything else on your mind from a financial red flags perspective?
Yeah, I just want to leave with the quote from the French author Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and he talked about like a goal without a plan is just a wish. So I would encourage people to start early, have a plan, and work with a financial advisor and it's never too late. So I'll just leave it there.
Very well said. As for us, thank you for joining another episode of Capital Conversations. This is Ryan signing off. Enjoy the rest of your day.
The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or on any specific security. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. As always, please remember investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Please seek advice from a licensed professional. Correct Capital Wealth Management is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Correct Capital Wealth Management and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advice may be rendered by Correct Capital Wealth Management unless a client service agreement is in place.